Hey guys, welcome back to the third episode of Data with Darshil, and in this video we have a guest, Benjamin, also known as the Seattle Data Guy. We talked about many different things into data engineering space, from how we got started with the data engineering, how we got job at a Facebook, what is the general process looks like for the interview in the data engineering space, top technologies to learn in 2022, and many more things. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and learned something new. And don't forget to check out his channel. I will put down all the links in the description. He does a lot of content creation in the space of data engineering, so you can connect him on LinkedIn, follow him on the Twitter, and subscribe his channel on YouTube. And without wasting time, let's get started. I was talking to a lot of friends and even myself and the journey of data engineering, because this is the term I've never heard in my college. And when I talked to a lot of people and talked about their journey, everyone had different journeys. So I want to start this podcast by discussing what was your journey when you got started with the data engineering. What was your journey?
Yeah. I think we all have a very similar kind of experience there, where it's like, yeah, there's no, we didn't even know that data engineering existed. I mean, data science at that point was still kind of coming out, right? Like Harvard Business Review's article came out, I think, in 2012. So yeah, I think at that point, all I knew about was data science. So I started working in the industry, started working more in like a project analyst, data analyst style role, doing a lot of SQL, data warehousing, using like SSIS and things of that nature. And then I like to tell people I was staring at a data warehouse for like the first like 3 to 6 months of my job and didn't realize it was a data warehouse, right? Like I had taken a database course. So I was like, okay, it's a database. That's what this is, right? Like, or, just a traditional relational database, not realizing that it was a completely different paradigm, right? Like, it's like, what are these facts and dimensions? I don't know, but I'll use them. So yeah, so it's you don't even realize you're kind of playing in this space until later on. Even like SSIS and how it's used often for ETLs and things of that nature. It's like I just used it because that's what I was told to use. I didn't know there was like a bigger framework that they kind of all fit in. So yeah, no, I think that's very similar. So like first job, again, kind of doing all that. As I was kind of looking for my next job, I think data engineer, just like I was like looking up SQL. I think I was like SQL like in Indeed or something. So I was like skills. I've got SQL, Python. What jobs have SQL and Python? And I eventually found a data engineering job at a startup, and started kind of doing that work there. Realizing that it was very similar to what I was doing. A lot of SQL, like this data warehousing thing that was kind of still new to me, and I was kind of like building my foundation on, and reading Kimball and things of that nature. To kind of like understand, okay, well, what is, all of this stuff, and trying to put together all these pieces. And then at that company, I started to kind of get the concept of like ETLs and like, oh, okay, that's like its own thing. And like, there's very much process to doing it. And a lot of people do the same kind of process, which is like back then and even now, like people do like cron tab, do some sort of like Python script or bash script, and try to automate it somehow manually, and then eventually learning about Airflow and all that, and better ways you can do even that stuff. So yeah, that's kind of was like the initial path, right? Like it was very like clunky, right? Like you run into one piece, you run into another piece, you kind of start piecing it together, and then like you maybe put something together. Like ETLs, I kind of had one mental model of, and then like eventually ran into Airflow, and then I kind of redeveloped that mental model, and like, oh, we can do this better here and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of my process. Very, very clunky, very, very piece by piece.
So yeah, I guess that's the same experience. I talked to a lot of people, and they also had like they were working on like SQL administrator or just writing SQL queries somewhere, and then they got the opportunity and they got into data science and started doing all the ETL stuffs and all the other things. So now you recently quit the Facebook, so I want to like talk more about your Facebook journey. So how did you get into Facebook on the first place?
Yeah, so basically, I'd kind of been applying there, I think, a year prior before my initial interview. And in fact, I think I first got asked to kind of interview with them like 6 months to my actual interview. So they asked me to do it. I was like, okay, I'll do it in like 3 weeks. And like 3 weeks came, and I was like, I think I freaked out, and I was like, I don't feel ready. I really want to do this right. So I was like, you know what, just call me again in 6 months. And so they kind of came back to me in 6 months, and I re-interviewed, and they had me interview for 2 different roles. They're both data engineering. One was like on the infrastructure side. One was on, I think, more like the analytics side. I got basically one job offer, didn't get the other. So that it was kind of like, it was just like that constant applying. Like I'd put my name in probably a year or two before they even reached out to me. And I think I've noticed that with a lot of companies. It's like once you hit that 3 to 5 year experience mark, a lot more people are interested in you.
Yeah.
it's always hard. I think the first 2 years, if you don't get an internship in data engineering, especially at like a FAANG, that's why I usually tell people it's like, if you can get an internship, if you can't, you're probably going to be in kind of a little bit of a waiting period until they feel like you've got enough experience and they want to check you out again. But it's always going to be easiest to get like an internship or like right out of college kind of experience with them, or any of the FAANGs, just because the bar keeps raising every year.
Yeah.
They expect more and more, so it gets harder and harder.
So yeah, so you had some previous experience, and based on that, you got the opportunity. But let's say if I'm a fresher, or I had like 1 year of experience, and I want to work for these companies, but they have like all those interview processes. So what is the general process looks like in the FAANG companies? Because some say like you need to be really good with the data structures algorithm, you should know the SQL and all the things that are in the community that they talk about. So what's your experience like when you were in this company? So what is the process looks like for the hiring?
Yeah, I think it's always going to depend, right? Like if you're in, I think this also depends, honestly, like even like the country you're in. I feel like whenever I see people commenting in my comments that are clearly maybe more from India, like data structure and algorithm seems to be a much bigger thing.
Yeah.
I think it's like you guys have either a higher bar because it's just expected or something, like where I feel like it's somewhat expected here. Yes, you'll often need it, but like I feel like the bar isn't as high. I always feel bad. I'm like, oh god, I didn't have to do it that much. I feel like we're a lot heavier on the SQL side. I think what's ended up happening there, especially like when I look at the two areas, is that like I think, because a lot of people have migrated some of the work over to India because it's like, oh, it's super expensive to hire a bunch of, engineers in America. So let's try to move it over. And so what ends up coming on our side is the much more abstracted version, right? Like we get like the SQL heavy side and the code heavy side, which is unavoidably going to take anyone a long time, gets moved away because people are like, oh, we don't want to pay for this or something. And it's always very silly in that regard. But it's just this interesting way that, so yeah, I've always seen like the and even like the tools, I always see people talking about in my comments. It's like Hadoop is mentioned a lot more, I think, by a certain subset of people, where it's like in the US it's like we're like Snowflake and abstracted things, and like, how do we get away from those things? So I think it really depends where you're at. I think in the US some data structure and algorithms, but honestly more SQL and data modeling is probably more important.
So more of like, yeah. So
curious.
even so, when I work with the clients, they expect me to understand the SQL and the business side rather than learning data structure, because I never had a chance to interview for the big companies. So just wanted to ask you this question. And like, this is the general process. I mean, in India, you have to go to the coding round first, and they filter out a lot of candidates before they even appear for the technical interview. So that is the reason people generally ask, like, is TSA necessary for FAANG or not? Now, coming back to the Facebook, so you are working in the Facebook, and generally the work we do in a different companies, it differs from each organization. Now, what was your role at Facebook? Like, what is your day-to-day task looks like?
Yeah, I mean, so at Facebook, a lot of what we do kind of varies, but like my goal was always to kind of like, one, find new projects. I think that's a big thing in Facebook. It's like, as you get more experience, you're kind of pushed to find new projects. And I was really helping a lot of companies, like internally, externally, integrate with Facebook's kind of some things that we had. Like, so from both sides, I would kind of like, okay, we got data from external vendors, we got data going to external vendors. I was kind of setting up a lot of those pipelines, as well as kind of creating data sets for like analysts to work with. It ranged pretty widely on kind of what they'd be working with. So, building kind of their data sets as well. So yeah, that's why I feel like I have a very broad view of what data engineering is. Like, some people I think view it purely as the data scientist, like you're just helping data scientists, productionize their things. I mean, I did that, but I also did the data set kind of development, developing kind of data sets for analysts, and then as well as like integrating a lot of just solutions and vendors and things of that nature. So yeah, it was pretty broad.
Yes. Okay, that's like a really broad view. It's like based on your like day-to-day experience, what do you think that are like must-have skills for data engineers? Because you've been working maybe on the manager position or from the business point of view side, and you might be handling teams and everything, but if the person is just starting, or a fresher or freshly graduate from the college, so what are the must-have skills for data engineers that you should know to get into data engineering?
Yeah, and I was very much an IC. I wasn't a manager, but
okay.
In terms, sorry.
Okay,
in terms
sorry
of like, no, you're all good. In terms of skills, yeah, like like if you're just coming into it, I think there's certain skills we can expect you to have. I think it's like SQL, Python is always like, or SQL coding. We kind of just generalize it, coding from an interview perspective. But SQL coding is kind of like a must-have, because like those skills are they don't necessarily require a ton of like hands-on experience. Like, yes, you have to build things, but you don't necessarily have to be at a company to experience them, or work on them and get them better, right? Like, there's plenty of ways you can do that just by doing leak code or something like that. The harder skills to get that they are also kind of expected to kind of learn is things like data modeling, product sense, things that I think you need experience in the industry to kind of like get an understanding of it. Like, you're not going to grasp it from a book. You can read it and kind of glean and understand it, but I think it's hard to perfectly like, understand everything about it. Like, you can maybe read data modeling enough to pass an interview, but then when it comes to real life, it's going to be hard to perfectly implement because there's just so many nuances there. And the same thing with product sense. Maybe there's some things you can pick up from a book, but more than likely it's going to be time and experience that's going to give it to you. So generally, when I was interviewing new grads, that's kind of what we looked at. It's like we almost expect you to score better in SQL and Python than an experienced worker, because you should be more. It's like the GRE, right? Like you should be more familiar with these very simple concepts than someone that's like now doing very high level concepts and maybe coding sometimes, but not coding as much as they used to, kind of when they're right out of school and you've done tons of coding and leak code problems. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that makes sense. So I guess the understanding of the basic fundamentals and the SQL is required, and you might get the business understanding as you start working in the companies and get the exposure. Now, so when I started my journey into data engineering, I used to work on some of the cloud technologies and handle all those things. But now it's been like 1.5 years, and the technology is changing like really fast. So how do you stay updated with the trend? Because when you leave the company, and let's say if you go to another company, or let's say if you leave a job, go for the freelancing, consulting, and all the other things. So what's the way to stick with the trend? Because technology changes like every 6 months or 1 year, new things come. I was working on the Redshift. Now the like hype is the Snowflake. So I have to learn the Snowflake. Maybe after 2 to 3 years, there might be new data warehouse that will come in the market, or the new way of doing things such as data lakes and data mesh and all the terms we hear every day. So how to stay updated with these things? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, and I think I put out a video about this recently, and I usually start with like just have a solid foundation, because regardless of any tool that gets put into play, they're all built on the basics. And so again, having that solid foundation and beyond just SQL and coding, even understanding things like ports and system administration and networking, and the technical networking, not obviously personal networking, but like understanding that is super valuable, because that's going to build on whatever tools come next. And so you're going to be able to grasp things faster. Because most of the time, like whenever I see a new tool, at first I'm like, oh my God, it's super intimidating. And then like, for example, DBT has been a new thing I've been working with more and more. And it's like, it's not really, it's really just Docker with a few other things added onto it, right? Like, okay, we're putting SQL and these you just have to kind of learn where things go. And then it's like, okay, but I'm just running something in Docker and spinning it up and running a test, and cool. So, it's really just built on a ton of fundamental things. And so if you have those fundamentals, it's much easier to kind of ramp up to new technology. I also say like, pick 1 or 2 technologies maybe you want to learn in a year, but don't get too distracted by the hype. There's new things come and go, right? Like Hadoop was the big thing for a very long time. And again, I'd say I see people trying to move away from it, because it's like, it's a lot of work, writing MapReduce jobs and all that.
Yeah.
It's hard. People are moving away from Redshift because it just wasn't built for data warehouse people. Like, it was built as a data warehouse, but without asking people who work on data warehouses what they wanted. So that's why everyone likes Snowflake, because it's like, oh, this has everything that I expect a data warehouse to have. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can get caught up at the hype, but understand that like, yeah, just learn when you need to. Learn what companies, maybe technology you want to go to, but don't get too distracted. But because things like you said, you'll get distracted by something that will disappear in 2 years. So you can think like, oh, I got to learn this thing, but it's like, well, look at what things sit around, learn those things really well, and then occasionally pick up a new skill or 2 here and there. Consulting's a great way to do that, because I'm constantly coming into new situations. So you learn just to like, oh, okay, how do I learn this quickly? And again, I think the easiest way is make sure you have a solid base, and then from there it'll just be easier to kind of build your next layer. So
yeah, that makes sense. So like having the strong fundamentals is the key again. So I guess we are like like end of the 2021 and entering into 2022. So what do you think, like everyone should focus on the tools? So let's talk about the tools. So what are the top tools currently the industry using? Let's say the Snowflake that is in the hype, but what are the other tools that industry are using that people should learn if they want to learn more about data engineering from the hands-on point of view?
I think, obviously Snowflake, like you said, I think DBT definitely is starting to play a bigger role. I'm definitely seeing a lot of people trying to implement it or implementing it successfully. So I think that's definitely providing a lot of value. If you don't already know Airflow, I think Airflow is great. And then maybe you can pick up one of the more niche concepts like Dagster or Perfect or something like that, and try one of those as well. But I think Airflow is a good place to start if you don't already have that. What else? Visualization wise, I mean, if you're building visuals, like I'm still a fan of Tableau and Looker. I know plenty of people aren't as much of a Tableau fan. I think a lot of people are moving to Looker, but Tableau is great for quick development. Let's see, what else?
Messaging queues, the streaming service.
I mean, like if people want to learn something like Kafka, I think that's what I always have in my back pocket is Kafka and Kinesis. Those are kind of the two that I use and spin up. So those are also some personal favorites. I was trying to think. I just lost what else I was thinking. I was thinking like also like maybe picking up something like just because like people are kind of figuring out how to implement things like data mesh and data fabric. I think Trino is definitely interesting in terms of like a SQL engine. So if you're more interested in like doing data infrastructure and figuring out how to set up data infrastructure, spinning up a Trino instance or something can be fun. If that's something, which is just Presto in case anyone's out there. It's just Presto and SQL, same thing. Or Presto and Trino, same thing.
Okay, those are the new terms even for me, so I'll definitely check it out. So I started my career towards the data science in the hype. So I read somewhere that data science is sexiest job, so obviously I wanted to explore that. Now I tried data science, machine learning, and I was working on that, and I ended up working in data engineering. So why do you think there was a hype of data science in the industry, and why now data engineering hype is coming also for say like, what's your take on that? Why data science and now why data engineering suddenly?
Yeah, I think there's multiple reasons why data science is probably sexier, and I think will remain quote unquote sexier, at least in appeal, like at least when someone tells you what it is upfront. And I think it's because when you think about it, like it's more tangible in terms of like the results are more tangible. Like it's like, oh, what if you made an algorithm that's like the Google algorithm for search or something like that, right? Like something that's very like, wow, that's $1 billion idea, right? Like you don't necessarily have that, like I think that same sexiness on data engineering. Like data engineering can really feel like plumbing sometimes. Like don't get me wrong, you can build products with it. I've seen a lot of people build products with it where they basically just scrape a ton of websites offline, basically using some sort of data engineering, standardize it all, and then build a product and resell that, repackage it, and then sell that as a website or as a service. So you definitely can build products off of data engineering, but I think a lot of people it's a lot easier to talk about these like sexy things. And I think it also sounds smarter, right? Like I think data science and machine learning is like, oh, I'm a machine learning engineer. I think there's just that like, oh, I'm really smart. I know lots of complex math. And so I think that draws people to it, right? It's like, oh, I want to sound really smart when I'm like at a dinner table or something. So it just does, when I say I'm a data engineer and people are like, what do you do? I'm like, I just move data from point A to point B. Exactly. Like that's like some people might not find that. There's a lot of nuance in there, right? Like there's definitely a lot of nuance in how that happens, but I don't want to get into the nuance. It's a little easier to explain to someone's like, oh, I built an algorithm that can detect XYZ. I think that sounds sexier than saying I built a pipeline that pushes to a table. So yeah, but I think the separation generally happens is like you said, like you start going the data science route and you're like, but I want to build things and I want to like code infrastructure, and you just start naturally like finding yourself in that path. So yeah, that's why I think like I don't necessarily know if data engineering will be sexier. I think it'll have a bigger draw just because there's a bigger need for it at the moment, because we need the infrastructure in place before we can do data science. But I don't know if I still think the sexy part is on the data science part for most people, at least mentally, like in their brain. It just sounds cooler.
Yeah. Because I was like hearing a lot of them that this data science is dead now, this data engineering is the new hype and all the other things. So just wanted to understand your view on this. Now, so I guess we covered a lot of things. So just want to like have your like final advice. So if someone is in like fresher or just in the college or want to explore the data engineering space, and also the new year is coming, and so with the new resolution they want to get into this field, so what's your just final advice for those people who are watching this podcast?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of good things you can do. I think there's a lot more support for you guys out there than there was when, a lot of us were coming together. So yeah, like I think, following your channel, my channel is a great way. I think we both have some sort of data engineering roadmap put together. Either of those probably work great, just in terms of like helping you figure out where you're at and what you still need. I think that's always very helpful. So I think that's one piece of advice, like look for something like a data engineering roadmap. And I forget who else. There's a few of us who have data engineering roadmaps. I'm trying to remember who else does. So, any of them probably are all solid, and, check out those, see what skills, pick up a skill or two from one of those data engineering roadmaps, see what you want to fill in. If you have time and want to read a book, pick up Kimball's, data warehousing book to at least understand that, like kind of where we came from data engineering wise. I mean, I think that's why I usually recommend that book to people. It's like, we might be moving away from it. Hard to say. Sometimes I still see plenty of Kimball. So I don't say, I think we're still very much on it. But it really is the basis for a lot of what we do. And so understanding that will help you understand where we're trying to go. So I think that's a good book. If your audience hasn't read it yet, I think you can find it for free online. There's like PDFs online, so you don't have to pay for it. Yeah, that's kind of my advice.
Okay, that was really great. So basically understanding the fundamentals and just getting started with something like learn SQL, Python, and get started with the data engineering space. So yeah, so I guess that was like really great. So thank you for joining. Thank you for giving your valuable time to me for this podcast. And yeah, thank you.
Nope, thank you so much, Darshil. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all your time. I really appreciate your content. And yeah, I look forward to see what you're going to put out in the next year.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you are still watching this video, then don't forget to share your thoughts and your learnings into comment section. And also don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you are new here. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next video.